Hi, guys. Welcome to the COVID Commentary SLC, where we discuss all things related to the coronavirus. I know some of you guys listening maybe think we're a little dumb for starting a show about the coronavirus because it's quote unquote not going to last very long. But regardless of what Trump says, our motto here is we're just at the beginning. And you know what? That's absolutely true. We are just at the beginning of this. So like we mentioned last time, we did start a Facebook page. So if you want to find us, there's not much going on right now there. We're posting links, but we're still trying to build a following. So go ahead and search up on Facebook COVID Commentary SLC and join us. Before we jump into the numbers, I know you said you had a family member that was showing some symptoms and was getting tested. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually my mom's been she suffers from an autoimmune disease. She has a fibromyalgia, as well as a number of other medical issues. But she's, I believe, just 51, so 51-year-old, and she had to go get tested. They stopped allowing her to come into work, and her temperatures were kind of all over the place. Like, she'd get tested and it would be 98, and then she'd get tested, it would be 101, and then they were kind of testing her 3 times a day, and she works at a old folks facility for hospice aid, actually. So they take it really seriously there, and they're changing gloves and changing masks and everything. But somehow she may or may not have been infected, but she was actually tested 3 days ago today, and there's still no results. She's actually called directly several times, and she said it was about her 10th attempt or so that she was calling today because she's not allowed to work. And they basically said, hey, we're backed up. And she kind of gave them a piece of her mind and said, well, what the hell did you do? Send it to China? Like, just get me my damn answers. So, I mean, we're hoping for the best. And I mean, she doesn't have any crazy symptoms. She's definitely got the fever. She's got the headaches and the weakness and just kind of shortness of breath and whatnot. But she's definitely in good hopes and in a good state of mind. She just wants to get back to work. She's definitely not the type of person that would just sit at home all day.
So is she since she started noticing the symptoms, did they recommend that she start self-isolating?
Yeah, that was their first step, and then she actually had to make a doctor's appointment. And when she had made that doctor's appointment, they basically instructed her just to do it all through her laptop. So she had kind of did the same thing I did for my stomach and had a virtual doctor's appointment, and basically just went over everything. And she had been kind of having symptoms for a few days, just like the dizziness and the weakness, but the fever started probably about 3 days in. And 3 days later, it's still there. So I mean, I'm not 100%.
Yeah. Did they do the test where they shoved the thing a meter up her nose?
Yeah, I wish there was a way I could upload her actual reaction, because I had her record when they were doing it to her. So I don't have the video of it actually happening to her, but I have her entire response audio. And they stabbed. I mean, she was parked in her car, and they're all dressed up in gloves and masks and everything, and she was the first one there of the day. And it's basically all just coned off, and they have this huge test area set up in front of the hospital, and you basically drive up, and they have this, I don't know, we'll say about 6 inches, 7-inch long Q-tip, and it's very, very flexible, and they basically have to go all the way back until they touch bone, and once they do that, that's where they get the sample from, and then pull it out, bag it up, and send it off for testing. But definitely not seeing the 48-hour turnaround that we were seeing. So.
Oh, so they are doing the actual drive-up testing in Utah?
Yeah, they are.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of that or seen that or anything, but that's good to know. That definitely seems like a really smart idea to kind of keep everyone safe. But it's pretty unsettling to hear that it's taken so long for them to do the testing. I mean, I know I've heard several people talk about advancements that they're making in the testing to where they can do them much quicker, and how it's going to make a big difference based on the advancements. And yet we're still hearing, I mean, obviously this is just one case. We can't ultimately generalize everything based on it, but if there's many more people in the country experiencing this same thing of having to wait days, this could put a serious lag behind on the numbers. It's just a little unsettling to hear that we still don't really have a grasp on the most basic part of this, which is the testing. And jumping over to the numbers here, if we look at the testing that the US is doing, it seems like we've peaked. I don't have any. I wish somebody would throw together some good charts about the tests, because I don't see any charts on the Worldometer's website that go over the testing specifically, but it would be very interesting to see the number of tests, at least as back as the couple weeks ago when they started keeping track of it on this website, the number of tests versus the number of cases. Because something we've talked about a lot on this show is that the cases grow exponentially, and that's because one person spread it to 2, spreads it to 4, spreads it to 8, but yet our testing ability does not follow that same exponential growth. It grows in a linear way. So if our testing is growing 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to we're probably about 200,000 per day, that would need to jump up to 400,000. That would need to jump up to 800,000, then 1.6 million if it was going to attempt to keep up with the speed of this virus. So, and of course, we've seen so many manipulative tactics from all these different countries of trying to suppress information and trying to keep their numbers low. So, of course, they don't necessarily want to ramp up their testing more. I'm speaking specifically about the US, because that would reveal that we have way more cases than we do have. Notice right when we ramped our testing up in the US, we saw an explosion. Right when our testing reached its capacity, we saw it cap off. So to me, that's just a direct indicator that we are not, I mean, because we've been getting about 28,000 to 35,000 cases a day in the US. It's kind of chilling in there, but we're doing the same amount of testing every day. So of course, if you're not doing more testing, the numbers of positive results you're getting is going to kind of max off. So, I'm hearing a lot of things from Trump that, we're going to open up very soon. What do you think about that whole idea, CJ?
It's pretty ridiculous when it comes down to it. I mean, you can't plan on opening up an entire country when you don't have, you don't have containment on it. There's not there really isn't. I mean, there's people that are, still living their everyday life, still doing the same thing. We're still having people diagnosed every day. We're still having, more and more tests daily and more deaths daily. Like, as things like that happen, you can't just, as you see those numbers go up, you can't just foreshadow that, 2 weeks from now, things are going to be back to normal and we're just going to open back up, unless you potentially want to, see the entire country shut down even further. Like, I mean, I know that right now they only have, if you're an essential worker, or if it's essential, then you're able to work, or you're able to have your business open. But, if we were to reopen and, things would, I wouldn't even say would or might, things will go downhill very quickly and result in much stricter closures and much stricter just policies when it comes down to anything being open. I mean, I almost think it's irresponsible having all these, like, so many restaurants open and just having all these grocery stores open. Like, yeah, and that's, like, where I work, but it's not it's not ideal for the situation right now. If you want to contain a virus that's spreading so tremendously and causing death and causing sicknesses and costing so much money, costing everything, then you're gonna have to really, really sink down into it and say, okay, let's get all of our sources. I hate sounding like a total socialist, but we have enough food in America to feed everybody for, a month or two if we just stopped everything. So if we just stopped, shut stuff down, and, did a 2 month of where everybody gets tested, and, if that's door to door or whatever, then, realistically, that's the only way you're going to contain anything that's this severe.
Yeah, I agree that would be better than what we're doing. But of course, there's the economy aspect to it where we've got to try and keep that alive as much as possible. And the narrative that the White House and that a lot of governors and stuff is having is that things are almost about to get better. And that's what they've been saying from the very beginning, is that we're turning the corner right now where things are about to get better. You hear Trump use terms like sooner rather than later instead of giving an exact timeline. And you know what? That's what they're doing because they're trying to keep this narrative that this is going to be in the rearview mirror fairly soon. And that's because stock investors and business owners, they want to hear that narrative. That's what makes them feel better and feel like they're not going to be losing money on their investments, or their business isn't going to be collapsing. But I just the way we're doing it right now, it almost seems like potentially the worst way you could do it, because we're leaving just enough things open to where it is still spreading and it's still going to continue to spread. And we're just basically guaranteeing that it's not going to be stomped out. And, regardless, the numbers, we've already been over this so many times. They're all bullshit. Nobody can trust the numbers anymore. We've seen the exponential curve in it. And then, our abilities to keep up with it is just not sufficient. So that exponential curve is enough to know the power of this virus. And it's just chilling, waiting right now, waiting for things to open back up. The second we start opening things back up, it's going to explode. And we've seen this in places like China, like Singapore. Like any place that has attempted to open up has been severely punished because of that. And, some kind of interesting numbers we're seeing from China today. They just reported 1,290 deaths today, which I need to hear somebody explain that, because I don't know where that number just came from out of the blue. They've been reporting less than 5 deaths for the past couple weeks, less than 5 deaths per day for the past couple of weeks. So the deaths they had today represent a quarter of the total deaths they've had this entire time. I mean, who could look at this and think, oh yeah, China's doing, reasonable reporting here. They're doing some trustworthy reporting. The numbers they're throwing out is just completely random, whatever they feel like they need to report to try and make it seem normal. I mean, yeah, the whole, anything that comes from China at this point, number wise, can't be trusted. They've shut down everything. They're not letting any media in there yet. I'm hearing so many reports from Wuhan saying that they're having outbreaks. In Hubei province, they opened things up for, I'm not exactly sure how long. It may have been a week, maybe 2, or maybe just a few days. But
I think it was 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah. And that was just, according to them, they technically opened up. And then now they're sending out letters to all the residents saying they're starting their lockdown now. So, people in the U.S., we're seeing protests and stuff now from people who feel like their civil liberties are being trampled on, and I totally feel for those people. If I wouldn't have become obsessed with this virus from the beginning, then I would definitely be thinking that the government is doing some sketchy things with this. Trying to enforce all of this, people staying in their houses, kind of trying to crush the small businesses. But luckily, I got such a good perspective on this virus early on from Chris Martinson. So I kind of understand that the government response has actually been too little. If you're one of the people that think we need to be opening now, wrap your head around that. We're not doing enough. Technically we should be closing things down even more than it is now. But yet we're seeing churches and pastors getting arrested, getting fined. We're seeing people alone on the beach getting in trouble. And that's because, obviously it comes down to a case by case thing. Sure, the guy that got arrested on the beach, sure, maybe they should have just let him go, as a dumb cop. Sometimes these cops don't think, and sometimes they put themselves in a more dangerous situation by not wearing a mask while they're trying to address people for not wearing masks. So much idiocy out there. We're seeing, and we're gonna see way more of it as we continue. And these protests, I would kind of say that's kind of idiotic as well. Here's the thing: if you want to protest, wear a fucking mask while you're doing it, at least, okay? And have everybody there wearing a mask, because then you're going to be taken seriously. If you think this virus is imaginary, if you don't think thousands of people are dying every single day, I know that's just a statistic in your mind, but thousands of Americans are dying. Tens of thousands. I think it's safe to say tens of thousands, or over 10,000 people are dying worldwide, because I know that the deaths are not being counted. So if you want to be taken seriously, then show the government that you're taking the virus seriously and wear a mask out on these protests.
Well, and understand with the numbers as well, one thing to take into account is if these people are being tested and they have some underlying condition where it's like they have cancer or they have, some sort of lung issue or heart issue, I've noticed that a lot of these they're being categorized as those kind of deaths. They're not being categorized as a coronavirus death or a coronavirus case even. I mean, I guess it'll count them as being tested and counting them as an active case, but as a closed case or as a death, it would just, I guess, count it as a recovery because, I mean, like, they're just not counting those people. And in New York, I know that they're not counting people that die in their house from coronavirus.
Yeah, and I would love to have so much information about that we could say for sure what's going on, but I'm hearing a ton of information from all sorts of different countries. From the UK, they're not counting deaths from nursing homes. In New York, they're not counting the deaths from people dying in their home. And it mostly comes down to a lack of testing, but it also has to do with these countries just want to continue their narrative that things aren't as bad as they really are. But we don't have definitive info on that. And of course, they're not testing these people. So nobody has definitive info on it. But, we want to at least share what the rumors are. Maybe in some cases, there's potentially a country that's reporting more deaths that shouldn't be reported. That's also another possibility. There's probably at least some case where that's happened, some sort of scare tactic or something. But the vast majority of this is cases going unreported, or at least that's what I'm hearing from several different resources.
The one thing you can account for, which, take it with a grain of salt, but the United States numbers are probably the most realistic.
That's true. We've definitely done the most amount of testing. We are kind of one of the more transparent nations, like especially if you compare us to something like China, where the media is locked down and they have a propaganda branch of the government and they have people brainwashed to believe that the Chinese Communist Party is this godsend from heaven and they're the most righteous authority figure on the planet. And you know what? We have actually learned a little bit, or quite a bit, from China's brainwashing tactics. See, they can test out all these weird tactics on their people because they don't have civil liberties like us. But when they find something that works, when they find ways to pit the population against each other, that idea gets exported to other countries. And that whole the effectiveness of the brainwashing they're doing in China is representing itself in the United States politics and our divisiveness and our polarization that we're seeing in everything. So yes, definitely, I agree with you. The U.S. case is probably the best scenario that we can get the most accurate data on. Unfortunately, we're seeing some pretty shocking data from the US. I just clicked on the US on the Worldometer's website. We'll go over some of these numbers. So 37,000 deaths in the US total right now. Okay, if you look at that number 5-6 days ago, you're going to be at 20,000. So we've already doubled since then. I mean, if any article you read, assume it's already several thousand higher than that, because we're losing thousands per day. And like we said, some aren't being counted. So 37,000 deaths. Go ahead and take a guess how many recovered we have. 60,000. So, about twice, not even twice as much as the deaths that we have. So the percentage right here of closed cases is just horrific in the US. Okay. Now, I don't think it's going to end up being this high, but where we sit right now, we've had 97,000 cases which have had an outcome, and 38% of those have ended in death. So if that 38% represents the true mortality rate of this, even closely at all, then this is much worse than what we're hearing. And I think, the kind of the death rate we're hearing tossed around most from authority figures is 1% or 2%. I'm really not seeing much to support that. I guess maybe if you consider there's probably a lot of cases going untested out there, then you can probably make a case that to put it around 2%. But every country you look at, we're seeing 5%, 7%. Now that this has really had its way to work its through, we're seeing really high percentages of deaths. And so in the US, we're getting around, kind of average around 2,000, 2,500 deaths per day, somewhere around there, which, like I mentioned last show, that is the leading cause of death in the US right now. And that is with lockdowns. Okay, so I'm hearing from a lot of people that, this hasn't been that bad. We shouldn't have locked down the nation. Blah, blah, blah. People die from this. Blah, blah, blah. People die from that. This is the leading cause in the US with lockdowns. Okay, so you need to take that into consideration. This is accelerating faster than any cause of death in the US right now, and could potentially kill unimaginable amounts of people. So I was looking through this a little bit earlier, and I was looking for the daily new deaths to see if we broke the record today, because we had 2,500 and we did not break the record. 2 days ago we had 2,600, and the day before that, 6,100 deaths in the U.S. If you look at this graph, it's like kind of slowly growing, and then boom, it spikes up to 6,100, and then it kind of drops back down. I don't know how I missed that 6,100. I didn't see that when it came up. They must have posted a lot, because that's headline numbers right there. That would have knocked me off my feet if I would have saw that, because we've been chilling at 1,900, 2,000. Did you see the 6,000 when it came through, CJ?
No, and that's the thing. I believe, and I've gone back and checked days later, or like the next day, just to see, and I've compared it. And that, like right now, how if you could look at yesterday/today's numbers, they're a certain number. If you go back and look in the morning, those numbers are going to change.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really been looking at the daily deaths or anything, but yeah, we talked about revisions a little bit last so that they're probably doing revisions on this. But if that's the case, if we had 6,000 people die, you got to realize that's 4 or 5 times higher than the next leading cause of death, which is heart disease. And you know what? I feel like nobody's really listening to our show anyway. YouTube's suppressing us. They're not letting us do any sort of advertising or anything. So if you're hearing this, then that's great. But
well, there's one point that I had that when you go over the numbers in the United States, that the main thing that I personally find concerning is the fact that the U.S. population is about 300 million, and we've only tested 3 million, or 3.5 million, and that's roughly over 1% of the people tested. Like, you've tested, you've tested 1% of our population, and in that 1%, 612,000 have came up active, and with that, like 37,000 people have died. Like you're gonna, like, that's not even a piece of, like, the puzzle, like, that's like a half of a piece of puzzle. Like, you can't, like, there's really, like, no way. And the fact that we're looking to open the country back up by May 1st is just like, I don't know, it's like shooting a dead body. Like, it's absolutely useless.
Yeah, they just want to maintain that narrative. And yeah, you're absolutely right. 3.5 million tests, 710,000 of those have been positive. So we've tested a tiny portion of the population, and of that tiny portion, 20% have been testing positive. I mean, there's
Yeah,
no
20% of the 1%.
yeah,
Like,
there's no evidence right now to say that we have any sort of grip on this whatsoever. But of course, they want to go with that narrative. And in some states, they haven't got it that bad. Like in Utah, it's been very mild here, which I'm glad, because I'm obviously doing a show about this, so I'm following all the crazy news. But I'm glad that none of that crazy news is really happening in my immediate vicinity. So that's nice. But there's definitely a complacency here in Utah and in several other states where they feel like they should be opening up. And I don't think, like, I'm glad it's hasn't been that bad, but I don't think that it's going to stay that way if we open up. So we're all interconnected as a nation, and the virus is here already. Nobody even needs to bring it in. It's in Utah. We're getting over 100 cases per day. Who knows how many are going unregistered? We seem to be a fairly healthy state, so maybe a lot of people are just kind of powering through it. But any state that decides to open up now, I would bet a pretty hefty sum that they're going to see an explosion, because it's already there. It's just it doesn't quite have the spreading mechanisms right now to cause a scary scene like we're seeing in Washington, or like we're seeing in California or New York, where it kind of hit them first. And you know what? We were lucky enough to see it hitting other places first, and we made a smart move and we closed stuff down. I was really surprised when Utah actually closed things down. I totally thought our whole nation was going to be dragging their feet. And then, boom, one day everything just started closing. I was like, whoa, okay, that kind of gives me some hope for this virus, especially locally. And, it's been great. Everything's kind of going on as normal. No one seems to be too traumatized here, but that doesn't mean we can relax on it. And unfortunately, I think we're going to. I think in a lot of states, we are going to relax it, and we're going to have to learn the hard way, just like the several other countries that are learning that the hard way.
well, and I want to say the World Health Organization, and I believe the CDC, are actually investigating, um, currently investigating the where the virus came from, and they're starting to really investigate if it originated from a lab in China. And I thought it was pretty ridiculous, like, at first when people were saying that, just because I'm like, there's no way. But now the fact that, the U.S. government's, like, stepping up, and, even the World Health Organization stepping up, and they're saying, okay, where the hell did this thing come from? So at the very least, if we're not anywhere near a shutdown, but we may be a little bit closer of finding the origin of where this thing came from, and that may even get us a little bit closer to finding some sort of cure or treatment that is actually, positive, since even at this point now they're saying with all the ventilators that the ventilators don't even do much for you. They help keep you alive for the time of being, but they don't cure you and they don't treat you. It's just literally a Band-Aid solution. So unless they were to come out with some sort of vaccine, and they're still going to have a huge amount of people that are going to say no to a vaccine right away, because I wouldn't want a vaccine that came out in 3 months.
Yeah, a lot of the treatments I'm hearing of, the chloroquine, a couple other ones. uh, when they first came on the scene, well, actually, the chloroquine came on the scene months before Trump talked about it. They were testing it in China with somewhat promising results, and of course, once Trump got a hold of that, he started blasting that info like it was gonna save the day. Why? Because he's trying to keep the markets up. He's trying to keep spirits high in America. He's trying to keep you thinking that it's right around the corner. He is a con man. He is a confidence man. His job is to make you think it's right around the corner. You just got to do this one last thing, and then it's going to be there. But yet, all of these treatments have yet to really have any effect whatsoever. They may in the future. Chloroquine, it's shown some good results. It's definitely not going to just make this go away. That's 100% guaranteed. It's definitely not going to just fix this. With several, with the antibodies in your blood, that may kind of prove to be a little bit better of a treatment.
Yeah, that's probably the most natural way that they're going about it. I mean, I know that that's how they treated people with polio when it first came out, and a few other diseases that I know of, that they would take antibodies that were found in people that were cured or people that no longer showed symptoms. And I mean, that is obviously, it's definitely the scientific way to go when it comes down to this stuff. But I mean, like we're just so early into testing with all this that, there's no way to know what's going to respond to it.
Yeah, and we're in a modern world, so there's, we can't doubt too much. There's got to be something we can do against this virus with all the medical technology that we've had lately. And, it seems almost a little surprising that we haven't really had anything that we can do with it yet. But I say let's go ahead and jump into kind of the next portion of the show here. I do want to touch before we want to touch a lot about, or a lot of articles we have here on kind of the food shortages, since that's something we've been kind of hammering down on a lot lately, talking about being prepared. And so we decided to throw together a lot of articles about that specifically. But before we touch on that, I want to just briefly bring up a couple things I've been seeing in the markets lately. Probably first and foremost is the crude oil price, which I've brought up in previous shows. The previous low that we got to was $19 a barrel a few weeks ago. And keep in mind, that was at about $65 a barrel before all this started. So we're less than a third of where it was. And Trump had kind of made some tweets, and there was a lot of rumors going around about how Saudi and Russia were going to come to a production cut agreement, which, if there's too much oil in the market, then a production cut is going to ease off some of the supply and kind of make it so it's not such a competitive market out there, so it's not flooded with all this oil. And so they kind of rallied up to about $26 a barrel. And then, they actually did announce some cuts. They announced a 9 million barrel cut. I don't know if they're actually going to hold their word on that, but the global demand is down over 20 million barrels. So that 9 million cut they did was just for PR. They just wanted to, get people to boost the prices a little bit, because there's a lot of people trading on these prices and seeing if they can make a little bit of money off this WTI by buying it low and then selling it when it goes up. So a bunch of people bought in hopes that, because it's ridiculous that oil is this low. It's unthinkable. So any trader in their right mind is just standing there with cash in hand, just waiting to throw it at the oil market, because they just know that oil is worth more than 40 cents a gallon where it's sitting right now. So, they got eager to get in this, and then, the production cuts weren't nearly enough. And now everyone's starting to realize that. We had an 8% drop today, which of course is only $1.63, but still we broke the $19 lows. We're in new territory, $18 lows. I think oil is going to be free before this is all over. Do you have anything to say about that before I move on to the next thing?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you there. I mean, when it comes down to it, a lot of these, I guess we could just say mass-produced items or just mass-produced things in the economy. Like, it kind of goes the same length as with the like the dairy farmers that I was talking to you about, and how they're producing 150% of what they need, so they're basically dumping 50% or an extra 50% that they're producing that they're literally throwing away because it has no value. And if you were to push an industry full of something, like if they just pushed it all out, and like just imagine the price of butter would be a quarter a piece. You get milk for 50 cents. Like, I mean, it's a real possibility. And I mean, that's the same concept when it comes down to the oil is, if you have an abundance of oil in a market, especially like a market that's just sitting, then that price is just going to continue to go down while you have this huge, backload of oil just sitting there literally until, the right moment to sell it. But you don't want to sell it for, pennies on the dollar. A lot of these places are going to end up waiting or trying to wait it out, or basically giving in and, making that 1% profit where they could have made 100.
Yeah, I agree. We'll touch on that. I know you got an article about the milk thing as we kind of jump into the food supply things, but quickly, I want to bring up what's going on in the gold markets. It's been seeing a pretty good rally lately. I actually bought my gold at the low at 1450, and it recently broke its several year highs, which was sitting at about 1745, I believe, and we got up to about 1760 within the past couple days. But then the last 2 days has been a little bit brutal. It's back down to 1700, so we're kind of pulling back. But as long as it's holding that 1700 mark, then that's really good, because all the other assets are taking a beating. I know crypto has been doing all right the past couple days, but still, Bitcoin was at 10,000. Now it's at 7,000. So even though it has recovered from its $3,500 low, it's still making up a lot. But gold's one of the only things that's actually made up everything and is now testing new highs and potentially going to skyrocket up to something much higher. Now, if we're talking about the real stock market, that is all just completely fake, manipulated markets. I mean, the only thing you need to know to invest in the markets now is, where is the newly printed money going? If you are trying to find, if you're trying to base your investments off of value investing, Warren Buffett style investing, it's pretty much useless, because if you look at the price to earnings of any of these companies, it's all awful. They're all overpriced. Even when the Dow and the S&P hit their lows, they were still overpriced based off of earnings. So, but earnings don't matter. If everybody is buying the stock, it's going to go up. And that's what this is now. You're not buying a company. You're buying a promise that it's going to go up. You're buying a promise that the Fed is going to dump more money into the market. So, that's exactly what's going to happen. And we're going to see we're probably going to break highs on the Dow and the S&P here in the near future. I mean, you print enough money, you're going to break all these highs. You're going to recover everything, and you're going to get those headlines. I saw just last week, I believe, it was the best week the Dow has seen since 1930, whatever, 1938. And then there was this picture going around on Facebook. It was Kramer, if you know that stock guy. It was Kramer, and on his screen at the same time, on the screen behind him, it said Dow has best week since 1938. And then in that little scrolling thing underneath him, it said worst jobless claims, ever, or whatever. Worst. And that's something else I could touch on a little bit is we are currently at over 20 million unemployment claims. So, and that's not counting everybody. Every single person that's lost their job or has been negatively financially affected hasn't signed up for unemployment. So, but there's been over 20 million that have signed up for unemployment. And as I said last show, there was about 150 million Americans on payroll. So, we're talking a huge percentage are now on unemployment, and yet the markets have the balls to start, have their best week, start recovering all their losses. I mean, the markets are completely disconnected from reality at this point.
Well, and another thing to take into consideration is the fact that you have every single American went over the age of 16 that has filed to get a $1,200 bonus in their check, and that $1,200 is going to be ate up by probably about 70 to 80% of these people within the next month. So, I mean, it is going to flood the market with a hell of a lot of money, but there's no way to tell exactly where that's going to go. And I mean, it's kind of like, if you have like one piece of gold, it's worth something. But if you throw a million pieces of gold in the same thing, then that one piece isn't worth anything. I feel like that's essentially what's going to happen to our market is we're going to have this overflow of money to where we're going to see, dollars almost be represented how like yen is, how, when you need like 50,000 yen to buy a TV or something. Like you would need like $50,000 to buy a TV because the dollar is going to lose that much of its, backing, its gold backing.
Yeah, and it is kind of a bad comparison, I will say, comparing it to gold, because unless we were to find like a gold asteroid, the comparison does kind of hold up, because if we were to find like a gold asteroid that came and hit the Earth and doubled our gold supply, well then gold would lose a bunch of its value. But the thing is we do not have the ability to put more gold on this planet. So that's why gold has held its value for 5,000 years. With the dollar, we can make as much of it as we want. It's any of the people in power can just type a few things on their keyboard and boom, there's way more of it. So it obviously has no real value. The only value it holds is the fact that we're all in agreement on it. All right, we'll go ahead and jump into the food supply things that we wanted to bring up. Do you want to go ahead and start with that milk one you were telling me about?
Yeah. So, like I was saying, the California farmers, where we get a lot of our dairy from, are, essentially straight up dumping milk, and apparently the same thing's happening in the UK and in other countries as well too. But just there's all these big schools and restaurants and universities and stuff like that. They they have all these huge dairy orders, and like right now, all these schools are shut down. All these these big huge companies that ask for all this dairy product, they're not currently up and running. So essentially farmers are producing 50% too much. Like right now they're producing 150% of the amount that they need, so they're turning around and dumping 50% of the milk that they get just to basically keep going. I mean, it's got to be millions, if not billions or trillions of dollars lost just in the industry, just because, I mean, you got to think the longer this stuff goes on, like a lot of these farmers are going to start losing their money. They're going to start losing their farms. And I see it coming down to this huge, like job loss, because there's not going to be a need for all these farmers, or there'll be a need for all the farmers, but there won't be the money coming to all these farmers. So eventually I feel like, you're not going to have this huge, loss of food, but I feel like eventually down the line we are definitely going to see some prices go up, and I could almost guarantee that that's going to happen, just at least on the dairy side. And I mean, I know on the the beef side as well, just because it's kind of all the same market.
Yeah, and a lot of the I heard a little bit about the people pouring out the milk because of the excess, and so far the type of things that we're hearing isn't necessarily like major food disruptions. Obviously, the trucks are all still going, the farms are still running, but there's kind of these minor displacements where uh, just because the system has shifted, like if we consider that kids are no longer going to school and that restaurants are no longer running how they normally run, that's going to kind of change this just in time delivery system that we have. There's companies that have contracts with, let's say, these dairy farmers, and they deliver this milk for it to be put in those little cardboard cartons for kids to drink, and that's where the milk goes all the time. So now there's no kids in school, so there's no place for this milk to go. So people are kids and stuff, they're now staying at home, they're eating different types of food, so it's kind of causing this shock of change on the system that they thought was predictable and now just needs to change. And because there's no place for a lot of this stuff to go, they're just having to pour it out. I'm hearing because there's actually a lot of the workers from other countries that normally travel to other places to handle the picking of vegetables and such. They're no longer being able to cross the borders to get to their jobs. I have an article in here, and I first heard that, and I was like, okay, that might have a small effect, but it seems like that may actually have a pretty large effect. A lot of these big farms are heavily reliant on these migrant workers to take care of their entire business, basically. So let me just go ahead and jump into this article. I definitely don't want to, pretend like I'm a food expert, but this is just such an important problem that we got to bring up these articles so at least you can make your own decision on it as a listener, just because it's such an important topic. So the article continues or starts in Canada, where farms rely on 60,000 temporary foreign workers. Their arrivals are delayed by initial border restrictions and grounded flights. Once they arrive, the federal government requires them to be isolated for 14 days with pay but unable to work. That's kind of a interesting circumstance that they put them in there. In the United States, nearly 250,000 foreign guest workers, mostly from Mexico, help harvest fruits and vegetables each year. The State Department is processing H-2A visas for farm workers with reduced staffing, though some companies are still having a hard time getting workers on time. And maybe some of the people that are out of work, maybe because this is obviously food is mandatory. If there's issues in this as a country, we're going to figure out anything we can do to fix this, even if we need to send people that are out of lawyers that are out of a job, if we need to send them into the field and start picking the fruit. The problem is Americans are just so in our minds above this work that it would nobody's going to be looking at the farms for a new job.
Yeah, and I mean, California is, taking some of that into account with their 125 million coronavirus disaster relief fund that is actually specifically just for undocumented immigrants. But I mean, I'm sure that covers a lot of those. I mean, I hate to call them strawberry pickers, but just a lot of the farmers that are illegal that really do come over and just try to pick and stuff. So, I mean, that's going to help them a little bit, but that's just one state, and that's a very, very small amount compared to the amount that they're going to be losing.
Yeah, and I remember what I was going to say about the currencies. I guess it kind of ties into what we're talking here about the food too. Is that there's tipping points in stability. So with the currencies, how you're talking about how a lot of the food prices would likely go up, and if we start seeing prices go up in everything, the reason inflation isn't too big a deal is because we can't see it. It's a little bit too slow for us to really see it. Everybody kind of knows that prices just go up in general, but if prices are going up, within if you go to the grocery store 1 week and then 2 weeks later they're up a little bit more, and then 2 weeks later they're up a little bit more, and then there's shortages and they have to start charging more for those, and then next thing you know, all sorts of other things are going up in price. There's breaking points where people are like, holy shit, is this dollar like worth anything? Is it what like? And then they're printing out more and more and more to try and solve this, and then people can kind of, nobody questions the dollar right now besides people like you and me, and whoever is crazy enough to listen to podcasts like this. But there's breaking points where people start questioning, what the hell is this paper thing that I'm using to survive, that these people can create as much of it as they want, and that now everything's costing way more, and I didn't get a raise. Did anybody get a raise? Has anybody gotten a raise throughout this? If you start comparing your wages to the amount that everything's costing in the store, you're like, holy shit, I'm making half as much money as I was last year or 2 or 3 years ago. And then at those breaking points, people are like, okay, we need to ditch the dollar, because every day that goes by that I'm holding this piece of paper, it's getting worth less and less. And then, the dollar works off supply and demand, just like any other good. If everyone's trying to get rid of their dollars and get into real assets, like say a house, because if the dollar's losing value, then it's probably pretty smart for you to just buy a house, because your house is still going to be a house. It's not just a piece of paper. It's still going to be a house, no matter how much piece of paper it's worth, or gold, or Bitcoin, or whatever else you think has value. And this food kind of has a similar breaking points where it's stable, and it's stable until it's not. And with global warming, we've kind of learned in recent years that our food system's already under a good amount of stress. There's been locusts tearing up harvests. There's been crazy storms coming through the Midwest America, flooding these wheat crops and taking them out. And there's been a African swine flu that's been tearing through China, that's been killing all their pork. I mean, food is one of those things that most of us don't think about much at all. But if it comes under any stress at all, then everything's on the table at that point, because first of all, if there's any food problems, then there's potentially going to be global conflicts coming from that as well.
Mm. Well, like even I was just reading about the for the beef issue. It just says that just this last week, the United States produced 25% less beef, which, I mean, that's a huge chunk, and that's literally just because plants have completely shut down just because of the virus, and they don't want people around each other. So that's going to result in some probably some expensive beef here down the line if it continues to flow that way.
Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and jump into this local news here while we're still on the topic of food. I have quite a bit of articles here, but I think you guys are kind of getting the picture, and luckily in the U.S., we probably are one of the more secure nations with food. I know we're seeing problems in China with food, and a lot of nations are kind of becoming isolationist from this. They're shutting down their borders. They're slowing down the shipping. And, so we're going to see countries that are going to have, some country for sure is going to have food problems throughout this. I mean, that's pretty much guaranteed. It's just a matter of which country does and how they handle it, and if they start freaking out, and how much they suppress that information, because showing that you don't have food is one of the biggest weaknesses that you could show. I know China has been really resistant to showing that. Any country in the world, you're not going to see that like on mainstream news being blasted everywhere. That's going to be like, no, don't tell anyone. I know it's going to be rough here, but just try to keep everyone calm. Don't tell anyone. It's going to be like that type of thing when it starts to happen. But we'll keep an eye on it. The people I listen to are definitely keeping an eye on it. There's the real true independent media out there, the people that are doing a really good job. And if you hate all media, then that sucks for you, because there is actually really good media out there. You just have to dig for it. And those guys are on top of the food situation. So I will definitely be on top of that as well and be reporting anything on this show. But since we're coming from Utah, We decided to do a little bit of local news here. This is actually from West Jordan, the state that I'm in. The article starts: just under 1,000 people waited in line for essential groceries from the Utah Food Bank in West Jordan Monday afternoon, as Utah grocery stores struggled to restock food to keep up with demands fueled by COVID-19 spread. The food was distributed outside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Benyon Stake Center through the food bank's mobile pantry program. Residents equipped with cardboard boxes, wagons, gloves, and masks began waiting in line well before the food was ready to be distributed. By 40 minutes after the line opened up, the donations all ran out. I'm not 100% sure what this is all for, probably for less fortunate people. Director of the food bank had planned about 100 extra people to show up due to the coronavirus concerns and loaded more food because of it, but he had never expected the numbers to be anywhere near 1,000. Today, we thought, let's bring enough for 250, and hundreds of people showed up. It sounds like about 1,000. Wheeling a small wagon, Ellen Estrada of Salt Lake City visited the church to get food for himself and his two children after hearing about it on Facebook. He said he arrived at about 3:50 p.m. and waited about an hour to get a bag of food, which contained Cheetos, tomato sauce, butter. Going to the local grocery store, he said it's been a frustrating experience with empty shelves. And so it seems like in Utah here, we're mostly, there was that kind of initial rush of people rushing to get the food right when the panic first set in. And then now shelves are kind of stocked up. There's kind of some things we're running out of. I know that the meat department's been lacking, but now it seems like everything's kind of caught up. But the real question is, will we see another panic buying session, and will that coincide with some of these supply disruptions that we're talking about here?
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of one of the things too that I've just recently started to see firsthand. Going back to work with Kroger at Smith's, and even as you were like going over the changing of prices going up, and I've actually, that's my job now, is I change the prices throughout the store, and I do it while they're stocking the store. And these stockers in the stores, man, they've had it up to about as much as they can. I mean, they can only stock what they have, and basically you turn around the next day and then twice as much is gone. And I mean, there really is no way of keeping up. And I mean, I could see the frustrations in the general public and everything else. And same with the, stores have been closing earlier, as well as limiting the amount of people that can come in. I know just recently today I saw places like Best Buy is making you pick up your orders just at the front door. You can't even actually go into the store. And I could see how when it comes down to the everyday person living paycheck to paycheck, right above poverty, how it would come down on them. And as things start coming to shape, you're getting less and less of what you need, and you're being stuck a lot just kind of on the back burner waiting.
Yeah, and a saying I've heard from several different things, when from climate change to financial things, it's always the least fortunate people that take the biggest brunt of any crisis. I mean, you see that in all sorts of different countries, and you also see it locally with us. When things start to go wrong, it's the people that are already in an unfortunate situation that end up taking the worst beating and kind of end up being in the worst spot. But yeah, I think we've kind of beaten a dead horse here on the food supply thing. If I'm still buying more food supply, food storage when I go to the store now. It's costing me quite a bit of money right now, but the things I'm buying, the canned goods, they seem like they're going to last about 3 years on average. And this whole thing, I feel so much better about it knowing that I have a good stock of food stocked up, because we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how it's going to affect the food supply chain. It may be completely unaffected, but even if there's only a 1% chance, it's such a big thing that me spending a couple $100 in food as an insurance policy is just worth it. So every time I go, I still stock up on a little bit, and it feels much better now that I have that. And I would personally recommend that to everybody. There's probably going to be some people out there that if this kind of just blows over and everything ends up being fine, which it's definitely going to have a huge impact no matter what. Things are not just going to go back to the way they were. But let's say I didn't need this food storage. There might be some people mocking out there. There might be people saying it was dumb or whatever. That's perfectly fine. This is a survival thing we're talking about here. And it's also a sleeping at night thing where I just don't have to worry about it. And if a year goes by, I'm going to start busting into that food storage and I'm going to start eating it. And I'm going to eat a whole lot of tuna and a whole lot of olives and a whole lot of chili and canned shit that I got. But you know what? I could probably live for 6 months off that food if I was just eating it by myself. So, it's kind of just a future investment. It may end up saving me money at some point. But before we go ahead and close this podcast off, I did want to mention the Fourth Turning book that I've been reading, because it's just making so much sense where we are as a society. The way he describes it is just clicking so many things in my brain, because we are at this point of instability in our society. Like, if this virus would have come through and we were a first or second turning society, we would know that catastrophe is possible and we would take this seriously, and we would have better leadership, more reliable leadership. But because we are in this fourth turning where the last catastrophe happened 90 years ago, so there's literally been this mood that's developed over the past 90 years that nothing bad can happen. And you can see it when you talk to the average person on the street. There's just no comprehension that a real crisis could happen, a real shortage of food, a real need to just survive and get through the next day, and actually potentially worry about wars. And so this book is, I'm so glad I picked up on it. But I will go ahead and read off 2 pages that I got over the past week. It starts: "The secular rhythm foretells another American crisis in the first quarter of the 21st century." And I'd like to remind you, this book was written in 1997. "Deep into the old age of those who were toddlers on VJ Day," not 100% sure what that is, "the next crisis era will most likely extend roughly from the middle 00 generation to the middle 2020s. Its climax is not likely to occur before 2005 or later than 2025. And, we're coming up on 2020, so we're getting kind of to the later end of the fourth turning. Given that 32 and 52 years are the shortest and longest time spans between any two climax. So if you follow the last 6 cycles we've been through, the previous 3 we've gone through the previous 3 crises was the Revolutionary War in 1770, the Civil War in 1860, and the Great Depression 1930, which led into World War II until about 1950. So every 90 years, there's been this huge event, and there's also been generational changes that happen every 20 years, leading into 4 turnings which eventually lead into the fourth turning, which leads into the next crisis. So we are right on the cusp of that next crisis, according to many historical cycle people that study cycles. So war cycle theorists, which is not the secular cycle like Neil Howe's talking about. There's another type of cycle called the war cycle. The war cycle theorists have drawn similar conclusions. Thompson calculates that the average interwar interval period is about 80 years. From this, he concludes, if we look 80 years beyond the end of the last global war in 1945, the year 2025 appears to represent a reasonable projection of the history of evidence. Modelsky and Farrar have each targeted the year 2030 as the next likely epicenter for a general or global war. Another scholar of long cycles, Joshua Goldstein at the University of Southern California, agrees that he would put the highest danger of great power war sometime around the decade of 2020s. And keep in mind, this was written in 97. The dates are suggestive, even if the crisis need not be as terrible as these images of Armageddon imply. The Saculum's last quadrant does not specifically require a total war, but it does require a major discontinuity or equiprosis, which is a word he uses earlier in the book, the death of an old order and the rebirth of something new. And I think that is so important to where we are right now, because misinformation right now is king. There's nothing anybody can do about that. There's this feeling right now that if we could just fix what's going on, if we could just correct the things and get the right information out there, that we could kind of fix this. But according to these cycles, there's no fixing where we're at now. We are at the peak of misinformation and mistrust. And that doesn't just get corrected and we just correct our path and go on to something new. This system needs a reset. There's no way around that. There's no fixing the behaviors and making it go back to a more logical and beneficial system to all. The only way we fix this path that we're going is some kind of reset. So I know I've been talking for a little bit. I'll let you touch in on this in just a second, CJ, after I go ahead and finish this last page. It says, we should take solace that the secular rhythm is only approximate. If it were precise, it would show human events to occupy the simple, inorganic domain of physical time, rendering our society hardly more interesting than an orbiting comet or a ticking metronome. Instead, the imprecise saculum shows that society occupies the complex organic domain of natural time. Nature offers numerous examples of this domain: the beating of a heart, the budding of a flower, the molting of a sparrow. The mere act of breathing involves hundreds of psychological feedbacks involving blood, chemistry, neurosignals, hormonal balance, and body temperature. No one can calibrate or predict its timing with exact precision, but every phase of breathing must follow another in the proper order at roughly the right moment, or a person would quickly die. Likewise, with the saculum, history moves in a progression of ebbs and flows whose schedule is regular yet not precisely fixed. Medelsky has likely the study of war cycles to the study of natural cycles. Even when winter arrives a bit early or late, it is still possible to foretell in what order the leaves will fall, the birds will migrate, and the streams will freeze. By correctly foretelling these things, people can prepare for the coming of a harsh season. So this whole predicting this, and that it's been such a reliable prediction in the past, it can be off by a decade. It can be off by 20 years. It's not the exact timing that's really important with this. It's the fact that humanity goes through these cycles. And the biggest driver that I've seen for these cycles is the aging of people who have been through hard times. And right now we're at a point where the people who have been through hard times are all dead or in nursing homes. Therefore, they're having no influence on society. So that basically means that whether it's because of this coronavirus or whether we go another 10 years from now, there will be a crisis. There will be a reset. And I think that reset will likely involve or start with or kind of revolve around a reset of the currency and monetary system as it is.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, that kind of covers all the lines when it comes down to the fact that, humanity as an entire, one thing is something that needs to stick together regardless of the direction that this thing takes us, because, regardless of it being, what makes this major change or not, we have to recognize it as something that is, and kind of evaluate it and then approach it with the right approach. I mean, right now we're just kind of, everybody's attacking it from different angles, and we're not approaching it correctly. And with that, it's it's definitely failing just globally, worldwide. And if it's something that people could accept that essentially this is going to change the way that people live, and it will change the way that the world, the entire globe functions. It'll change the business behind the world, and I mean, like you said, it's going to change the economy. It's going to have an entire major swing. And I think that the one thing that I got out of all of that is like it's destined to happen, but it's how are you going to react, and how are the people around you going to react?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, and because we're in the fourth turning, because there is this general mistrust of society and social institutions, it's almost like we don't have the ability to react to this virus in a proper way. Okay, we don't have the leadership in position. People, their first reaction when they hear of this virus is to think that it is a conspiracy theory, and no one can blame them. The whole social structure of trust and media and all of the information we get, we just know it's bullshit. So that's what's so fascinating to me about this is our reaction to this. Like you said, it's almost destined, because society is such a way right now that it is not prepared to deal with this. If this were to come through in a second or first turning, and a kind of major feature of a first and second turning is there is real leadership that people genuinely can get behind. Just picture that for a second. And what would that be like? What would that even be like to have real a president that most of the nation can get behind? That just seems incomprehensible. Right now we've got Joe Biden running against Trump, shit show versus shit show right now. That really just demonstrates that there's no saving this. There's you can't throw your vote in the right place that's going to make a difference. So that's why when we get to this point, when we get to the fourth turning point, there has to be some kind of reset. And then that reset leads into a crisis, which leads into hard times, which leads into good leadership. This isn't a bad thing. Nobody's done anything wrong this whole time. Nobody's running society in an incorrect way. Everything's going the way that it's supposed to go. But you can't have good leaders without having hard times. There's a saying that says, good times create weak men, create bad times create strong men. And that's the most simplest version of these four turnings, is that one saying.
Oh yeah, definitely makes sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You should, if you have some time, you should check it out. I recommend it to anyone. It's fascinating. Normally, this whole cycle shit is just like, yeah, okay, whatever. Kind of just blah blah blah. It's like astrology or some shit like that. But yeah, this is like really backed up by some real evidence. So, as we go ahead and close the show off, I wrote a question here that because, like I said many times, the book was written in '97. The world has changed a lot since '97. So I was kind of trying to reconcile Neil Howe's secular theory with the world we're in today, and I came up with this question. And I have no idea what the answer to this question is, but I figured maybe I'll just go ahead and throw it out there, and it could be something the listeners ponders. So, in the modern world, cultures have become more and more blended and connected as a globe. Technology has created a bridge across nations and states through social media. There's never been a time in human history where the global population has been on such a unified wavelength. Your book was written 23 years ago, before this explosion in technology had become apparent. So, given the fact that in your book, you kind of talk about isolated societies that go through these cycles, what effect do you believe this connection would have on the secular cycles, given the fact that we are acting as a globe now? Do you feel like it would amplify the cycle as a global phenomenon, or do you believe that it might somehow negate the cycle? From, it might negate the forces behind the cycle. And I don't know the question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody does, but I think that's something very interesting to ponder.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's looking like it'll be. I mean, in my opinion, it'll be like a fast forward button, and hopefully get us to the right spot where we need to be.
Yeah, I've got a feeling it's going to be more on the amplifying, like it'll be like a global fourth turning rather than just individuals. That's what it's looking like anyway. But yeah, we'll go ahead and end with that. I want to thank all the listeners for joining in, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. Check out our Facebook page. It was great talking with you, CJ.
Yeah, man. Thanks again. Thanks to all the listeners. Just go ahead and check us out at facebook.com/COVID commentary SLC and give us a like, give us a share. Trying to get those viewers up, listeners up.